Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Floyd Blaikie. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Sparkrock. Nice to see you all. Well, not see you, because right now cameras are disabled. So nice to sense your presence. Um, we are going to show the agenda in just a couple of moments here. We do have mics and cameras turned off for now. We're going to open it up near the end of the session for an interactive Q&A. So we will let people participate at that time. But as we're going through, as David is giving his presentation, feel free to drop any questions that you have in the Q&A. That should be accessible to you at the top or in the chat. And I'll be keeping an eye on those and making sure that they're all brought together at the end for our Q&A. So that's me, and I'll hand it over to today's presenter, David, for the rest.
Thank you very much, Floyd, and thanks everybody for attending today. As Floyd mentioned, we're going to walk you through a presentation and really focus a little bit differently than some of the topics that we've looked at before. So I see some familiar names. A number of you are definitely familiar with the program already, but what we'd like to do today is, instead of focusing on maybe just the features, we want a little bit to twist the conversation, or pivot it, if you will, to look at this more from a compliance point of view. So how can we use some of the parts of the system that are really good at automation to help you meet your school generated funds requirements and hopefully save you some time and save you some effort. We've built some new features into it, which I'll also show you today in terms of managing the expense side. But again, I'd really encourage everybody on the call today to think about those two things as we go through the feature sets. So really, how does this help me meet my compliance, and where are there places that we can automate elements of the process to make it a little bit faster and potentially more accurate as well. So we're going to go through first just a few high-level definitions to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. There are some differences province to province in terms of how some of the reporting goes. So I just want to make sure that we're dealing with the same set of terms. Then we'll look at collecting revenue specifically. What are some of the things that we need to consider when we're talking about the compliance side of school generated funds, and also how can we automate it and still meet that compliance? And then we'll do the same thing with expenses, and I'll give you a preview of how our features that we've built do really the same thing, help you with the compliance of your school generated funds, but now with that money going out through invoices and checks and vendor tracking. And then we'll talk a little bit about the reconciliation and reporting, and I'm going to try to go through that and still leave us about 10-15 minutes at the end for discussion. I would really like to hear from anybody what they think, if they have some experiences that they want to share, and really if there's just things that you'd like to see that either you didn't see in the presentation today, or that when you really think about those terms again, thinking about automation and compliance, maybe it'll spark some ideas and we can have a discussion. So without further ado, first, just a few definitions. So when we talk about school-generated funds, these do, again, slightly different terminology, province to province. But generally speaking, we're dealing with our non-government funds here. So these are funds that typically are raised from the community or from the parents. They can have to do with hot lunches and activity payments, field trips, product purchases, but also fundraising for both schools and for external charities. Now, when we look at the reporting, which we'll get into a little bit later on, it might vary the categories that we need to place these under, whether it's special purpose or maybe there's actually the set of categories like we have in Ontario. But generally speaking, those elements of school generated funds are fairly universal throughout the country. The ministry is going to set some guidelines. You're going to create a series of codes to track those, and you have to make sure that all this information is auditable. So that's really the school generated funds. We're just dealing with that side of the compliance today. We're not looking at any of the rest of the ledger. One of the other terms you'll hear me use a fair bit is a batch. So batches are really applicable to online payments. It's very similar to a bank deposit, except to online payments. So when you receive payments through the system, which many of you would be familiar with, those don't get deposited to the bank on a transaction by transaction basis. They get bundled into what is called a batch. And that's really just a series of orders that occurred over a 24-hour period. It's critical because that's what goes into the bank. So if we're looking at automating reports, for example, or predicting exactly what the settlement's going to be that you receive inside of the bank account, we need to make sure that we look at batch totals, not individual order totals. And some of you that are using the system, you may actually be already looking at order totals, and maybe this will spark some ideas for how we can help you and improve the process that you are currently on. So when I say batch, that's really what it is. It's 24 hours of a period. It's the orders and the dollar amounts that are deposited into the bank. Now, the ministry report, again, it does vary a little bit province by province. Within Ontario, we have 5 categories on the expense side, 5 on the revenue side that we need to report. All of our ledger codes tie up underneath those, and that's how we would think about submitting that information up to the ministry. There are slight differences in Alberta and in BC, but generally speaking, we have that same centralization task when we talk about the ministry report. We're going to take all of that information that's decentralized at the schools. So they've logged all of this revenue and expenses into a series of account codes. And when we think about the ministry report or the year end, it's really about gathering that information into the appropriate format, letting you review it at the district level, and then being able to submit that up to the ministry to, again, meet your compliance requirements. So though we may have some variances in the actual setup of those reports, that process we do find to be universal across the country. So we're going to take decentralized information, put it together, submit it up to the government. Now, when we talk about the key components of SGF, and I'll probably just say SGF to save us the time of repeating school-generated funds over and over, but there are a number of elements that school-generated funds touch upon, and I think this is really why automation is important, to make sure that we meet all of these different areas and that, you know, a pretty diverse group of stakeholders can get what they need out of the system. Now, part of that is really about the user controls and access of information, but also making sure that these types of considerations are present in both our system and then how you use the system. So when we talk about the source and purpose of funds, which again, right across the country, that's one of the main things that we need to make sure we do, that we categorize all of these funds into the right bucket, as it were. So when we talk about that side of it, the way we accomplish that in school day, we're going to take all of the account codes that you have already existing at the district, all the ones that are applicable to school generated funds, get those into our system, and now anything that happens there is automatically logged to one of those accounts. So that's really critical when we think about the design of the system and how people are going to use it, because it affects all parts of it. It affects the design of how we built it. Many of you will know there are hard and fast rules within the system that you just cannot accept income, and it's the same for expenses. You cannot send out a check unless it is tied to a ledger code. And then we have the ability to automate those entries into a series of reports. So then we start with what the need is at the ministry, make sure you identify the purpose of the funds. We figure out a way to do that. Let's make sure that we get the right chart of accounts in there, and then we try to figure out a way to automate that. Let's automate the load of the codes into the system and ensure that people are always attaching the revenue and expenses to those codes and making sure we can then automate the exporting out. So that's really how we try to think about all of these, and I won't go through each individually just to save us some time, but just to give you as an audience that understanding that this is really how we've tried to build these features. We went through that same process. If we start with what the ministry need is, work with many of our early customers and try to figure out, you know, how can we automate some of these processes and make them better, and then try to expand really the maturity of the reporting within the system. And I feel like that's where we're getting to today. So the expenses, that side that I'll show you today is really built directly from this kind of thinking. We start with compliance, how can we automate it, and then how can we make it easy for your users? Because as many of you know, some of your stakeholders don't need to know the top end financial policies. They just need to know how to use it and collect the funds at the school level. So I think that's key when we think about automation. If we make it too complicated or there's too much of this at the school level, we're really not going to get adoption and people using it, and that's going to prevent us getting those good records out at the start, out at the end when we need to submit them up to the ministry. So just very high level here. We identify the source and the purpose, and when we check off that compliance box, essentially through the managing of the chart of accounts, we do have a number of different payment options to make sure that if there are concerns in your district, for example, that not everybody can pay online, but you still want to make sure you track it within the same system. We have EFT, we have in-person cash, check, and debit payments. There are a number of ways to make sure that you can have a selection of payment options that ensures you've met the requirement to give everybody a fair chance to pay, but you still also have that centralized automation of the records. The banking and receipting, our system does the receipting a bit differently. And again, I think it's a really good place where we do the automation. The receipting happens at the moment of purchase, and I'll touch on that a bit when we speak about the revenue. But again, we're trying to make sure everything is receipted to the right account and that it happens in an automated way. I'm going to try to avoid the trap here of reading off everything that's on this slide. So I'm going to move forward. We're happy to share this afterwards. And we're going to have a follow-along document, which is really just our recommendations in a bit more fulsome manner for how you can meet these compliance points. But the idea is we have taken all of this into consideration with both the revenue and the expense side. And now we're really looking for some feedback in the market, and also just to move the discussion along to make sure that you guys are getting everything you need from your compliant standpoint. And when we think about the automation of those sides of it, there's really these three buckets that we're trying to make sure that we can do the automation of. On the income side, again, many of you are familiar with this, but it is auto-receipted. So we get those account codes, we make it easy for the admin to apply that account code to an item, and then really when a parent makes a payment, they are doing that receipting for you. We know as soon as that payment is completed, who paid for it, what they paid for, what ledger account it went to, the time and the date, and then also what batch it is associated to, so we know when it is going to go to the bank. And all of that happens in an automated sense in the background. And we really feel like this is a good advantage. There's a huge uptick in accuracy in this way. You don't have to worry about admin having a bag of cash and then trying to figure out which accounts it's supposed to be receipted into. All of that happens in the background and then is written directly into the record. So we've really tried to think the most probably on the income. It's the oldest part of our system. Many of you have been familiar with that side of it for quite some time. And the automation of all that income coming in can really make a big difference in terms of time saving. And again, just help with that accuracy and reduce some of the risk of having, human intervention and a lot of cash and or checks. Now, when we went to the expenses side, we really wanted to think along the same way. How can we introduce some automation into this, but ensure all of the controls are still there to make sure when you're thinking about your compliance or an audit-ready type of system, that we've really thought that through with the business controls. And with the expenses, that means things like if you want to lock down the vendors and have them just loaded from the district level so that there's no unapproved entities within the system, we can set it up that way. There are integrated automated controls to ensure that checks need to be approved by principals or other financial designates. So you don't have to do a lot of, manual checking of who signed the checks and everything else. We set up a control and then it's automated. And we also have a way to track all of the potential tax rebates. So any of the money that you send out that is applicable for a tax rebate, you can just check a little box, fill in the amount, and then in the background, we log all of that information so that you can have a tax report as well to, again, try to help automate that tax rebate process for you and give you really accurate records in a timely and automated fashion. The reporting is a big bucket. Obviously, there's a lot of information within school day and a lot of different things that we can do on the reporting. And my guess is when we get to the discussion, there's areas here that I know that we can probably help a number of our existing clients with already. Automating the reporting is something we've really been maturing over, I would say, about the last 2 years. So some districts have switched to a newer version of it. So I think a few of you are still really building manual reports on your own. But we have some exciting things that we've done on the reporting side, and that might be the biggest time saver we can do. And these are things like generating automated exports that can get sent into a district level finance system, and critically doing the journal entries as part of that. I'll show you a report a little later on that will give you the specifics. But the idea is one of the challenges we heard from our districts is in the reporting, trying to automate the journal entries would have saved a lot of time. So that's something that we spent a number of months developing. Some schools are using it already. What this really means is we can automatically journal entry for you what should be put aside to pay with the fees when you either get the bill or to accommodate for those fees if you're on a net payment. We talked to a number of districts and we found that this was something that people were spending a lot of time on. If we're not going to automate the journal entries, you can imagine at the end of the month, you've got a whole bunch of income. It's been logged onto your revenue chart of accounts, but now you have to accommodate for the fees that were paid for the online transactions. If you don't have that amount sort of preset and given to you, you have to go back and try to figure out, well, which revenue accounts am I going to pull from and how much am I supposed to pull from each? So we've really set up a way to automate that entire process so that, again, we can either send a daily upload directly into a finance system, or we can create a series of reports that at least make the manual entry for you very, very easy. And I'll show what that looks like a little bit later in the system. But just to keep hammering on this same idea, we've really tried to think of this as what do you need for compliance and how can we automate those pieces in between. Now, when we talk about collecting the revenue side, this is, again, the most mature part of our system. I won't spend too much time on this because I think a lot of you are familiar with it, but just to hit the high points and for anybody who's maybe not as familiar with how we record the revenue within the system, a lot of it comes down to how we set it up. So we try to take as much information as exists in the district and leverage the systems that you have so that we don't have to, recreate the wheel and create a lot of setup work for you. What that means is we need those general ledger accounts and we need the student and the class and the teacher information. So we generally will take those from your existing finance and your existing SIS. The benefit of being completely on the Sparkrock system is that we can take that internally. So instead of, let's say, your IT department sending us a file upload, there's a few options for the data integration, but instead of you having to send that to us, we can exchange all that information internally. The main thing to take away from this slide is I've sometimes heard the system described as an orchestration system, meaning we really try to take a number of things into the system, make it easy for people to use, and then send information back out from the system once it's been populated. And when we're specifically talking about the compliance, and I should mention forms compliance is a whole other one. Would love to do another webinar on permission forms and compliance for waivers and those types. We're just really talking about the financial reporting compliance in this case. But really what we're trying to do again is get that information in, populate it, and then send it back out in as much as an automated way as possible while ensuring we capture all of the information that's relevant. So school day really, it's the place your stakeholders come together. We've got the finance system represented from the ledger accounts. We've got the school admins represented by creating objects on the system for the parents to take action on. We've got the parents represented by the payments they're going to make. And then all of that sort of comes together in school day. We split up the records and we make sure that everybody gets what they need in terms of the data out of that. I have mentioned items a few times and people that use the system would be familiar with these types of items. But again, this is how we ensure that we get compliance through design in the system. So we've created these different items that people can post on the system. They are niche to make sure that all of the relative information is captured that's specific to that type of activity. So I mentioned just a moment ago, forms compliance. Our events are built in such a way that if you need to put a permission form in there, for example, all of the rules around compliance for that form are followed. These are things like informed consent, CASL compliance. Do we have the right details captured in the form? Are we using the legal language? But that's really how we control it through the object, meaning nobody can post it unless they've filled out all of the compliant rules first. And it works very much the same way with the finance side. So if we're going to post an event or a product, we need to make sure that we've already added the associated ledger information, and we just can't post it if we don't have that in there. So that's some automation and some compliance matching. It just means really there's no chance that you could have, let's say, a field trip that wasn't associated to the correct ledger account before it was posted and before you received any income for it. Now, when we actually log the income, as I mentioned, this is really the parent sort of receipting it for you, because as soon as they click that checkout button and we get the confirmed record, we know immediately the parent name and email, the student name, the date, the time. We actually record the IP address in the background in case you need to audit it at any point in time. The correct ledger account has been associated, as has the item information. So if we ever did need to audit this later on, we can really go back to that entire trail. So who posted the item, who had visibility over that item, meaning really what classes did it go out to, who paid for it, when did they pay for it, and what was the item level information. So did they order a pizza with pepperoni on it, or was it cheese pizza? All of that gets logged really at the moment of payment. And a lot of that work is done by the parent. They go in and fill out what they want to order. They fill out their type of payment. They make the payment. So really, they're kind of doing some of that work for you in this type of system. And again, that's really about the automation of it, right? It's if we can get that done at the time of purchase, and it's really computers logging it that we have redundant records for, it ensures you get better accuracy out of it, and nobody really has to sit there and do that manual receipting part of it. Now, in terms of the money, we really believe in this type of system. We don't think we should have access to the funds at any point in time. I think that makes a lot of the compliance a little bit more straightforward. And frankly, it's just the easiest way to automate getting the funds to you. The batches, as we talked about earlier, those get closed on a nightly basis and sent directly to the bank account we've set up with you to send those funds to. So it again means we never have any access to it. We couldn't touch those funds if we wanted to. And it also means neither we at our company or you at the school district have any access to the payment card information, which we also think is critical. It's very important. PCI compliance, which is just payment card industry, it's one of the highest standards for sending data back and forth on the internet. And I really firmly believe the less of this type of data that either we or you have, the more secure the system is. And again, it really just helps with the compliance if you don't have to store any of that credit card information. The level of audits that you need to go to, the types of databases that you need to have if you're going to keep that information are far, far different and really raise the kind of compliance and audit levels that you need to do. So it's much safer. This type of setup really means even if the worst came to happen and somebody hacked into the system, there is no financial information that they could take any action on. They can't get access to credit card information or credit histories, and there's really none of that type of information within the system. So helps the compliance, and it also helps that automation of just getting the money into your account. Nobody has to close batches or do anything manually. I mean, if we're comparing it to cash and checks, it also means there's no risk of that cash in hand, and you don't have to do any kind of deposit. All of those funds get directly into the bank account. Now, the expenses is a little new for us. We're really excited about these features that we're releasing. And as I touched on earlier, what we're trying to do is make sure that we've worked backwards from the compliance side to ensure that if we're going to introduce this feature, you're going to get the type of compliance and reporting and really business controls that you need out of it before you want to put it out into the system. So just at a very high level, as I mentioned, we've got some of the rules in a very same way that we do our revenue tracking, just meaning everything has to be associated to a ledger account. In the case of vendors and invoices and checks, you can't have an invoice without a vendor, and you can't have a check without an invoice. So again, making sure that we have all of those audit compliant pieces in place, and that there's really, really good tracking for where all of the funds are going once they're headed out of the system. We've set it up so that we can do regional settings for different tax codes. So for example, just depending on what you want to apply for rebates, there are different ways to set up the system internally to make sure that we can pivot province to province and get all of the rules captured. And again, some of that automated reconciliation process. So this is built into our new month-end bank reconciliation. So all the checks that go out and all the revenue that come in are all visible through one reconciliation unit, and you can handle all of the information directly in one place. And then we can automate some of the reports that come out of that. For example, the year-end ministry type reports. As I mentioned, we tried to get these logical building blocks within the system to make sure that we had, really compliant-based pieces. And if somebody needed to audit it, that there would be recognizable accounting type processes and terms in here. So the vendors are really the first block. We can build those vendors either directly in the system, or for example, if this was an implementation and you gave us a list of 20 or 30 vendors you wanted us to put in, we can do that. And then there's controls if you want to make them active or inactive. Maybe some are only used for the first half of the year, or one is you don't want somebody using a vendor anymore, but you want to make sure you keep all the records. We can just make them inactive and you still have full visibility. And then once we have vendors, we need to create invoices to pay against those vendors. And that gives us a separate object within the system that's really the tie between the dollar amounts and the ledger codes being effective and then the vendor. So we build a vendor, we then load an invoice that we attach to the vendor. And then when we're going to pay that invoice, we have to match the check directly to the invoice. So you don't just write a check for a dollar amount, you write a check against an invoice. And again, what we're trying to do is make sure we have as many controls as we can. Many of those business rules can be adjusted to make sure that it matches your district, but we wanted to make sure that these base building blocks are there so that we can automate some of these pieces and to make sure that you have a lot of controls and that really we can audit this. So the checks specifically, before anything goes out, you can have the confidence of knowing it's been tied to a vendor, it's been tied to an invoice, and that check, before it can be printed, has to go through an approval process through a principal or somebody else that you designate. And then we have an audit log for everything that happened in between. Now, just before we move on, if you'll bear with me, I'm just going to stop sharing this for a minute. And I actually do want to show you what this looks like. So hopefully everybody can see this screen here. You'll be familiar with our dashboard. This is one of our new sections. It's underneath the accounting. And you can see here's a list of vendors. So I'm just going to walk you quickly through what it looks like to add a vendor and then add an invoice and add a check against this. If we have further time at the end, I'm happy to dive in and show you a little bit of the month end and what that looks like as well. But we'll leave that to the questions if we have enough time, or happy to set up individual demos for anybody that's more curious. It's a bit more involved once we get into that side. But without further ado, we'll create a vendor here. You can tell we've tried to keep the design consistent. Each of these new features has its own dashboard so that we can see the activity that's happened within it. In this case, we have a listing of all of our vendors. We can quickly see their business numbers, if they're active or inactive, and the total of the amount outstanding. Now, in this case, we're going to add a new vendor. Now, I mentioned earlier, if this is something that you want to control at the district level so that you provide us, let's say, a list, and then nobody at the school level is allowed to add any new ones, we can set up those types of controls. In this case, it is open right now. This is set up like a demo, so you don't have to see me typing all of the parts, which, believe me, is the best for everyone. But this is, again, set up like a number of parts of our system. We have a form. It's got tabbed through fields, and everything with a red star is going to have to be filled out before we can save that. So in this case, contact numbers, contact names and numbers, business numbers for any of the tax receipts that we need to do, and the various information that we need to make sure that we have all the contact details. Now we're going to save this this vendor. And you can see we have the choice. It's not active currently. We are going to activate this one. And then we're going to go over and create an invoice. So we've got our new vendor created now. I want to add an invoice for this. We can see our vendor we just created there. In this case, I will make it a tax fund refund applicable. And in this case, it's just going to prompt me for a dollar figure. So I can put in all of the information. Again, we're going to go with critical information marked by these red stars. We've got to make sure we have our dates, our invoice amounts, the invoice number, and the vendor. You can also see the drop down for the account number. So you in this very same way that when we create an object for income, we must have an account number associated. It's exactly the same for the invoice. We do also have the ability to run a complete set of ledgers for just expenses and one for revenue. So if that's the case, when you would click on this account number, you would just see your expense accounts. But again, this is something that we configure with you as a district, depending on how it's set up. If it's just one set of ledgers and both income and expenses go through the same one, it's perfectly fine to use it in that way too. So we can see our invoice has now popped up. It's currently at an unpaid status because we haven't paid this one yet. So we're going to go through to our checks. And now we're going to add a check to pay that invoice that we just created. Now, in this case, when you go to add the check, these numbers will be defaulted. It's going to pull the information in from the invoice in terms of the invoice number. The check date is going to default to today. The check number also is controlled to make sure that we account for every check in between. And the amount is going to be pulled again from the invoice. So what we're really trying to do is put some compliance rules in here. We don't want people to just sit down and be able to write a check for cash, let's say. So we have to make sure that we have those building blocks in between, which again, our check pays an invoice is associated to a vendor. And if we don't have that full set of business rules, we can't make the payment. Just going to save this check. And then I just want to show you quickly in regards to the statuses. So you can see 3 different statuses here. We have printed, reconciled, and pending. Now, pending means it hasn't been approved yet. This check could not have been printed. Printed obviously means it's been printed and sent out. Reconciled means it's been cleared. So that's when you do actually go through the month end and you associate that check with a line on your bank statement, that means it's been reconciled at that point in time. Now, if there was for some reason a problem, I mentioned earlier that the check number, I got to approve this one first. So apologies, I am the principal in this case. I'm going to approve the check, and you can see approve will now change to print. We'll get a print dialog. We can see a quick payment stub. This is configurable either during implementation or you can set this up yourself. You can see there's a configuration tab, which we won't jump into right now. And now we have this at our printed status. But let's say we had an error with that print and we need to reprint this check. We're going to go in and override it because we had a print error. That'll give us the option to print it again. I like printing checks, so I'm going to do that. And then we'll get the same summary again, and you can see our check number has moved to number 8 from number 7. And now we have a full tracking of that as well. So again, here's our dashboard. We've got all of our checks and different statuses. We can search start dates, end dates, various number of entries. But let's say I want to check, well, what happened between these two checks? We can still track all of the ones that were printed. So we have a complete record of everything that was printed. You can drill down and see exactly what it was for. It would go back to the check listing and also who approved those checks. So in this case, we just have one principal at this school who's gone through and approved it. The main thing to take away is we make sure that that check number, we have a record for every single check, even if you had to override one or create a void check or whatever it is. We want to make sure that we track every piece in between so that if somebody does want to audit this, we have all the records and they can completely see everything that's happened within the system. So I'm just going to jump back to talk about reconciliation now, because that is obviously a big part of what we do. There we are. So listen, now we have all this information within the system. We've got a whole bunch of income records. Maybe we've sent out a bunch of checks and expenses. So now we need to really figure out how we're going to reconcile this and automate some of the reporting to make sure that we hit our compliance buckets, but it's not too burdensome in terms of the process. Now, when we talk about reconciliation, you heard me talk about the batch before. The batch plus the settlement are really the things that we need to look at. So the batch is going to tell us what orders happened. That gives us all of our ledger mapping and the dollar totals. But the settlement is actually when it got to the bank and the actual dollar figure that got to the bank. Some of you are with a partner that deposits the funds in gross. So the settlement amount is the same as the batch amount. And then we have other customers that get deposits as net, meaning the payment provider takes their fees out before they're deposited. So in that case, the batch and the settlement, you have your gross sales, but you also have your settled sales. So we track all of these amounts independently. We have integrations in with the payment providers to make sure, hey, if they did subtract fees, that we can find out exactly what the amount was of the settlement, because this is really critical to the reconciliation when we talk about trying to match to the bank account. And really, that's what we need to do when we're reconciled. What we're looking for with school-generated funds reconciliation is, can we account for every line item in the bank statement that is associated, so all of the money in and any of the money out? And then can we also reflect that same total as a ledger balance? So we're really talking about, dual entry, but this needs to be able to automate that kind of the process. And that's really reconciliation for us. And within the regulations that the ministry sets out and the compliance that you need to meet, sometimes this is a little different, board to board. So for example, what we typically see is when we talk about reconciling the bank account, there's going to be a principal involved. They have to sign off. In some cases, this is regulation. They're going to need really just a deposit report. How much money got into the bank, and can I verify that against what my bank is saying? So can I have a bank statement as backup and then something for school day that lines up line for line? So we'd call that a deposit report. That's the first part of our reconciliation. But then for the district level, centrally, you're going to need to see that same dollar amount, but reflected in your ledger tables. And not just the activities that they use, but how does that tie up to your year-end funds? So is it going into special purpose? Is it going into one of those categories? And that's really where I think we can offer the most in the automation. And I think it's probably fair to say a number of our clients are at different levels with this. So we have some districts that just handle this entirely on your own. There are reports that you generate. You have a process that's working for you, either with our older reconciliation feature or just the generated reports. And you have a way to get that into your centralized district finance system. We're really hopeful that if that's a frustrating process for you, if you have problems with it, that we can try to make that better. And that's really about automating this part of it. So what do you need specifically? Is it just that deposit report once a month? Or in some cases, we produce nightly transaction reports. And those nightly transaction reports can have not just the gross sales, but a journal entry for the fees. So as I mentioned earlier, in talking with districts, that seemed to be one of the most challenging areas that you faced. How do I pull from my revenue accounts to make sure I'm covering what any of the fees were for the online payments, but also how can I make that transparent so that it's, it's auditable and we really have a good sense of what's happening? So that's one of the places that we've really tried to add to our system. And Excel is what it is. I tried to make this look as nice as possible for the slide. This is really more critical to just think about the data that we're pulling here. So I talked about the deposit report. This is something that really we pull from our batch tables. We've just redesigned these, and we really did it so that we can increase the automation and that we can help really your users get this information as quickly as possible. I recognize a few names on the call that right now we're in the middle of this a bit. We sort of generate these internally and send them. With our new batch tables, you will be able to do this type of report directly through the system. And what that really means is, again, we're talking about compliance. So the design here, I've got my bank statement. I've got a series of deposits. They're going to look something like this in terms of the description. It's a little variance depending on the payment provider, but you'll see a series of deposits with just this description. So that's really the first part. And the way the new one will work, you just open up the report and you put in the first date of deposit and the last date. And then our system will generate this report for you in between. And as I mentioned, we're trying to really look at this as a dual entry. So these are the dollar amounts that were deposited into the bank that we can line up for. And then the ledger summary that's associated is really those same dollar amounts, but with the ledger totals, and not just the ledger totals, but in this case, we have made the automated journal entry for the fees. So we put aside a certain amount and then we see the actual bills. Our recommendation in this is that you run a fee account and you can see the ups and downs, adjust your calculator rate as needed. But this is really the critical part that we want to automate. Now, this is a once a month type of activity, and the ledger summaries we found in talking to most of you is the same type of sequence. Once a month, I match my activity to the bank, and then I load the ledger totals reflective of that activity into my centralized system. The other option we have, I mentioned, is the daily transaction sends, and I think I've got one more sample here. Yep. So this is the very quickly drawn up sample, but it's something more like this. What we usually do is work with the district. We figure out what are the requirements of the column uploads for your finance system, and then we can send something like this on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. And it is really, what sort of description do you need in your finance system? Here's your gross sales. Here's the revenue after we make the journal entry, and then here's the money that we put aside. So the rules between these can be variable. Let's say you want to put aside 3%, or maybe you want to put a 2.5% aside, depending on what the rates are. We can adjust this journal entry as needed. And really, again, we're just trying to get to what is the best way to automate this for you while you still get all of the information you need. So just to summarize on that again really quickly, monthly bank deposit reconciliations, we're looking at something like a deposit report. Monthly ledger reconciliations, we're looking at something like a ledger report. And then if you want to get that even further automated, to say, hey, why don't you just send that to me every day? Oh, come on there, Excel. There we go. If you want to send it to me every day into my finance program, let's set up a nightly file send so that my ledger balances I can pull out of my existing program. We're getting closer to the end, so if you've got a question about that part of it, just hold on for about 5 more minutes, and then we can deal with it. Yes, and then the final piece of that is, once we have all that information, we've heard again from our clients, listen, putting the administrative report together at the end of the year is a beast. It's a huge amount of information. You might have 100 schools that each have 50 independent ledgers in use, and that's a lot of information to try together. This particular version you're looking at is designed within Ontario. We have our 5 expenditure categories. This part of the system is designed to pivot by province. So if we're looking at something and we just want a special purpose fund here, for example, that it all ties up to, we would set it up in that way. This is the interactive part of what the ministry report that you're going to generate at the end of the year is. So we've built this so that you can query it. And I mean, if it's partway through the year, and you're curious, what's my total right now within student activities, you just want to look at elementary schools or maybe even just to a specific location, this feature is designed to give you that querying ability without anybody having to send you anything. So you could sit at the centralized district level and really go through and see what are the values, not just at the lower end of the schools, like at the category level, because you can already see that, but what are those values tied up a little bit higher. So again, province to province, it's a little bit of variance, but this is the back end of the system, pulling all of those different locations and all of those different codes together in whichever way you need to have them mapped, and then giving you the ability to look at it really whenever you want. This is integrated to our month-end close, which is part of the new feature set. The idea being here, as long as we close all of our months properly, when we go to do the year end, now because of that automation and that centralization of all the data, it's no longer a huge, long, burdensome process. We really just have to approve and then pull the data. You don't have to do any of those sort of tying together processes. That's really the part that we want to automate. So your school user just clicks from a drop down and says, add this to my special or to my field trip funds. But at the end of the year, that means you would be able to get all of that information across every location, really just at the click of a button without having to go bug the schools. So as long as things are set up properly to begin with, we get all of this rich information at the district level. And again, in an automated fashion so that you don't have to really be querying and trying to build these reports by yourselves. Okay, I think I'm a few minutes ahead of time. I've been warned I sometimes speak a little bit quickly on these types of presentations, so that gives us a few minutes extra. But I do really want to open it up to the group. So Floyd, I'm not sure if we have to do something to change the openness of the mics. We do, okay.
I think we do. Thanks so much, David. You're really good at that. I hope you know that. Let's see. This session may turn into something.
Commemorative mug for the compliment is coming later on. So
perfect. I may have to call in an expert here. I think that perhaps if we start the event with cameras and mics off, I'm not sure that we can.
Cameras and mics can be turned on if you'd like to. I edited that for you guys.
All right. Love it. This is why we invite Bree to all of our events, because she's the tech wizard.
And listen, if there's sorry, if there's no questions that immediately come to mind, maybe a few of these might help trigger some thoughts. These are the things that we're really focused on. Would really like to know, where are the challenges that we might not be aware of? Are there parts of this automation either with us or with someone else that you really like or that you don't like? And is there something I didn't get a chance to show or haven't discussed in the past that you would really like to see as part of this feature set? I think silence means we got everything, right? Is that how that?
I think it means you gave a very comprehensive overview, David. If anyone would like to ask with their face and their voice, you can go ahead, or you can ask it in the chat or in the Q&A. I see we have a hand up though, so I'll stop talking.
Oh, hi. I had a quick question actually with regards to petty cash. I think I saw that briefly I think just one of the slides had it. Can you speak a little bit more to your petty cash feature that you have?
Yeah, it's we built it based on the request that schools wanted to be able to run sort of a third set of ledgers that was specific to petty cash. So that's really how it's been set up. You can have an independent set of ledgers that is just for it, and it really just works with disbursement and reimbursement. So you create an item, and to make sure that we get the tracking, you attach it to one of those codes, and it's got an integrated disbursement right in it. I will tell you, it's not part of the initial release of the accounting set features, partly just because we didn't have as many requests for it, but it is part of our secondary release. There's going to be sort of an initial release and then a secondary part. What is it in the petty cash that you would really like to see?
I think it sort of is similar to the school generated funds. It's just that the accounts are not school generated funds categories. They're more related to the operating budget, for example, the general ledger budget lines, and then the reimbursement that you just spoke about right now, to be able to run reports to request reimbursement. Mm-hmm. So that's just sort of, do you have features sort of similar?
Yeah. It's very similar to that. It is an independent set of ledgers, so it's completely separate from the school-generated fund ledgers. Oh, okay. It has the integrated disbursements. I think the one part we'd have to dig into a little bit is who puts in the requests. Ours is designed from admin-based to account for the money that is going back and forth, but less designed, let's say, from a front-end point from a teacher who says, I'm going to go now log my expenses. So it's a bit in between the two of them. The admin can log them, but we would have to discuss a little bit if is it more like a teacher submission of expenses that that you're looking for
No,
on the
I
petty
think
cash?
administrative, I mean, I don't think it would be the teacher
Okay.
expenses logged. It would probably be admin. The
In that case,
secretary,
then,
probably.
yeah, it's pretty close then, I think, to what
Okay.
you'd be looking for.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, listen, I don't want to put undue pressure on anybody here to try to come up with something. So just before Floyd wraps it up for us, my thanks to everybody for joining. I've known a number of you from many years. You know, I'm pretty passionate about trying to figure out some solutions for these types of problems, and I really do think a system like ours can really help. If anyone is interested, we're happy to share the presentation, and there's going to be a follow-up paper. Essentially, it's not too burdensome, but it's you know, sort of 3 or 4 pages that really goes through this type of thinking. How do I meet compliance with an automated system? So if you're interested, Floyd, how do we get contacts from these folks? I'm going to need your logistical help there.
No worries. We have information for everyone from when they signed up. So we will follow up with a copy of this recording, and we'll make sure that you also get a copy of the white paper, which Dave is being very modest about. It's quite good, and he wrote it himself. So we'll be sending those out as well. I do see a question in the chat. Is it possible for us to see the parent site? If you're talking about the, you want to show that on the screen share? Just in case there is any confusion about that, a school day joined the Sparkrock family earlier this year, and we've just launched our new website, which contains information about school day at sparkrock.com. That's different from how you log in as a user. So the URL for that, Dave, is at school-day.com.
You got it. Yep.
Yeah, I nailed it in one. So we'll include some links to that as well.
We'll just throw that in the chat there. Yeah, so anybody can go. The parent site, by all means, I mean, you can always just actually go and sign up, even if you want, and really see what it looks like. There's a full set of knowledge guides and videos on our support site that will show you really what it looks like. And then if you're asking more as the admin, do I get to see what the parent sees? The objects you create, you can preview. So if you're creating it, you can preview it before it ever goes out to the parents. And you also have the ability to set approvals. So let's say you wanted your teachers to make it, but you wanted to approve it in the office before it ever went out to the parents. You can also set up things that way. And that looks like that was the second question there. So yes, yeah, you can post it, view it, and then use it like a parent would. Yeah, there's no limits on the number of parents that you can have associated. The way it works is we do a matching. So we don't take the parent information from the district. The parent signs up independently and then matches to the student. But you can also make public items. So you could easily sign up as a parent and just attach yourself to the school and see anything you had designated public. The only real restriction we have is you can't use your staff email address, because that's usually associated with your admin or teacher account. But we have a lot of our teachers and admins that go and create a parent account for themselves, either to preview it or because they might be purchasing things that are set for sale for the community. Does that answer the question, Vanya? Hopefully. Yep. Okay. Okay. Well, listen, everyone. I'm more than happy to give you a few minutes back. And as Floyd mentioned, she'll follow up with the logistics.
I will. You'll get a recording of this very soon, along with the white paper that David has prepared about compliance. Okay, thank you so much, David.
Thank you. And I'll just add, existing clients, if you guys saw anything in that you thought, oh, I'd like to see why we're not using something like that, feel free to reach out to me directly, and we'll set up a little consulting meeting to see if we can improve things for you.
Awesome.
That's it. That was my last part. Thanks, Blake.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Bree, for your technical support. Thank you, everyone, for showing up this afternoon. We really appreciate it, and you'll be hearing from us shortly. Okay. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye.